Flat tire? They say you're deranged for seeing it. But the real derangement? Ignoring the flat, still driving.
Welcome, deep divers. We're living in, well, quite an era, defined by disruption, right? Where shared realities, they seem to be fracturing right before our eyes.
It's a lot. Information overload is definitely real.
Totally. And figuring out what's truly important, what's just noise, maybe what's actively misleading, it can feel like a fun-time job, honestly.
It really can, sorting through it all.
That's exactly why we're here, to try and cut through that noise, sift through the details, and bring you the most potent nuggets of insight we can find.
Get to the core of it.
Yeah. And today we're embarking on a particularly fascinating deep dive. It's into a concept that's been thrown around, well, constantly in recent years: Trump derangement syndrome.
Ah, yes, TDS. You hear it everywhere.
You really do. But here's where this exploration gets, I think, really compelling. We're not just going to talk about its original meaning, which, let's face it, most of us are pretty familiar with by now.
Right, the standard definition.
We're going to pivot.
Yeah.
We're going to explore a provocative idea. What if the derangement isn't actually where we typically thought it was?
Interesting. Go on.
What if we could sort of flip the switch? Turn that critical lens back onto the accusers themselves.
Okay.
And explore what a new derangement syndrome, quote unquote, might look like among his most ardent supporters if, and this is the key part, if their core beliefs were to suddenly and maybe irrevocably shatter.
Ah, so the psychological fallout from a belief collapse.
Exactly. We're going to try and unpack the deep psychological architecture behind that kind of unwavering loyalty and consider how it might react to fundamental, really identity-shaking challenges.
And this deep dive is, I think, crucial because it touches on the very nature of truth, of identity, and political belief in our, well, deeply polarized world.
Absolutely.
It's about understanding the why, the why behind what we observe in political behavior, not just describing the what.
Couldn't agree more.
And we've gathered some incredibly insightful sources to guide us today. We're looking at cutting-edge academic studies on political psychology, group dynamics, incisive analyses of rhetorical strategies, the nuances of our modern kind of fractured information ecosystem. So yeah, let's truly get started.
Okay, let's do it. Section 1, deconstructing Trump derangement syndrome, the original accusation.
Right.
So let's really unpack this. For years now, the term Trump derangement syndrome, TDS, it's been this pervasive label.
Well, you hear it constantly.
Constantly, within pro-Trump discourse primarily. And it's deployed as this seemingly effortless way to dismiss any criticism. Doesn't matter how well-founded it might seem.
No, it's immediately framed as irrational, emotional.
Or even, a sign of mental instability. It feels like it's designed to be a conversation stopper. Just ends it.
It is, and it's absolutely critical right off the bat for us to understand that this is not in any way, shape, or form a clinical diagnosis. You won't find it in the DSM-5.
Not a real medical condition.
Not at all. This is purely political slang, albeit, a highly effective piece of slang.
Effective, yeah.
Its primary function, really, is as an ad hominem attack. That's a rhetorical device basically designed to sidestep the substance of any criticism.
How does it do that?
By attacking the character, or, in this specific case, the perceived mental state of the critic. It's what some analysts have called a weaponized dismissal.
Weaponized dismissal. I like that.
Yeah, and the cynical genius of it is that you don't actually have to engage with the argument being made at all.
You just apply the label.
You just apply the label, and boom, the arguer is conveniently dismissed as deranged. It's an intellectual shortcut, really. It bypasses critical thinking altogether.
And what's particularly fascinating here, I think, is that this tactic, it isn't entirely new, is it? It's not exclusive to the Trump era.
Not at all. The strategy of labeling political opposition as some kind of derangement syndrome can be traced back, well, over 2 decades now.
Really? Where did it start?
We first saw Bush derangement syndrome emerge pretty prominently back in 2003.
Ah, right. I remember that.
Yeah. It was famously coined by the influential conservative columnist and psychiatrist Charles Krauthammer.
Krauthammer, yeah.
And he defined it, and this phrasing is important, as the acute onset of paranoia in otherwise normal people in reaction to the policies, the presidency, nay, the very existence of George W. Bush.
Wow, the very existence. That's strong.
It is. And Krauthammer's framing was incredibly effective because it established this powerful precedent that intense political disagreement, maybe even outrage, could be framed not as, legitimate differences of opinion or even passionate dissent,
Must have.
but as a diagnosable form of mental illness, and that really paved the way for future iterations, like the one we're discussing.
That set the stage.
Precisely. Building right on that foundation, Trump derangement syndrome itself actually made its debut in August 2015.
Okay, so pretty early in his campaign.
Very early. It was in an op-ed by Esther Goldberg for the American Spectator. And what's truly intriguing is its initial target.
Who was it aimed at? Not Democrats.
No, not initially. It was specifically aimed at ruling class Republicans.
The establishment Republicans.
Exactly. The traditional conservative establishment who, at the time were deeply dismissive of Trump's then nascent presidential campaign.
Yeah.
They didn't take him seriously.
Huh. So it started as an internal fight.
That's right. This early usage really highlights how it began as almost an intra-party disciplinary tool. A rhetorical cudgel, if you will, used to enforce loyalty and conformity within the conservative movement itself, especially as Trump's populist insurgency was rapidly gaining momentum and challenging all the established norms.
A loyalty test disguised as a medical observation.
You got it. That's a great way to put it.
But then it clearly evolved, didn't it? It quickly became the, quote, preferred nomenclature of Trump defenders.
Massively, throughout his presidency and beyond.
Right. It was popularized relentlessly by MAGA-aligned media outlets. You heard it repeatedly from Trump administration officials.
And Trump himself used it a lot.
He did. He weaponized it in his public statements.
Yeah.
I remember then White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders explicitly called it a major epidemic among Democrats in a tweet back in, August 2018?
Yeah, that solidified its use as just this broad dismissal of any opposition.
And Trump also personally deployed the term, didn't he? Against Republican senators who dared to oppose his policies, questioning what was wrong with them.
Other than suffering from Trump derangement syndrome,
Yeah.
it transformed incredibly rapidly into this all-purpose rhetorical shield, just deflect any and all criticism, no matter what it was.
Okay, but here's where it gets maybe really interesting and frankly a bit concerning. Because this wasn't just like playful banter or political insults you hear on cable news.
No, it went further than that.
We actually saw concerted attempts to formalize this concept,
Yeah.
to move it beyond just rhetoric into the realm of actual legislation.
That's right. You look at Minnesota, for example. Republican state senators there introduced a bill to legally define Trump derangement syndrome as a mental illness.
They actually tried to put it into law.
They did. And chillingly, they borrowed Krauthammer's exact phrasing about the acute onset of paranoia.
Wow.
And similarly, in the U.S. House, Representative Warren Davidson proposed a TDS Research Act.
A research act to study it.
Yeah, aiming to study its psychological and social roots, which he described as a, quote, toxic state of mind. So you see, this isn't just name-calling. It's a very deliberate attempt to pathologize political opposition, to make disagreement seem like sickness.
And that raises a really profound and honestly disturbing question. What are the real consequences of medicalizing political dissent like that?
Well, historically, the precedents are deeply troubling. Think about regimes like the Soviet Union.
Right, the psychiatric hospitals.
Exactly. They infamously diagnosed political dissidents with fabricated conditions like sluggish schizophrenia and then confined them.
It wasn't about treatment, was it?
Not at all. It was a cynical but highly effective means of silencing opposition, discrediting their arguments entirely, and isolating them from society.
So this tactic, even if it doesn't go that far here, it still fundamentally threatens free speech, doesn't it? It creates a chilling effect.
Absolutely. People might understandably start to fear being labeled mentally unfit, or maybe even facing some kind of legal repercussion just for expressing dissenting views.
Which could lead to self-censorship.
Definitely. A stifling of public discourse. People just decide it's not worth the risk to speak out.
And if we connect this to broader historical patterns, you mentioned other ways dissent has been dismissed.
Right. This tactic also intersects with long-standing oppressive tropes. Think about how women's political anger for centuries was dismissed as hysteria.
The wandering womb theory.
Exactly. Rooted in ancient Greek notions, used for centuries to undermine women's intellectual capacity, argue against their right to vote, their participation in public life.
And there are racialized tropes too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Consider the angry black woman stereotype. It's been weaponized consistently to dismiss the entirely valid grievances of women of color who are facing systemic racism and sexism.
So the TDS label fits right into that pattern.
It fits neatly within this lineage. It mocks. It trivializes genuine outrage or concern by framing it as a disorder, rather than acknowledging it as perhaps a legitimate, rational response to perceived threats to rights, democratic norms, personal well-being.
It's basically a way of saying your anger is invalid because you're broken, not because I've done something wrong.
Precisely. It locates the problem entirely within the critic, not the subject of the criticism.
Okay, so if it's this rhetorical weapon, how does the TDS accusation actually work on a psychological level? What are the underlying mechanisms that make it so potent?
Well, at its core, once an argument gets labeled as TDS, it functions as what psychologists call a thought-terminating cliché.
A thought-terminating cliché, what does that mean?
It's a phrase or concept that, just by its very nature, is designed to short-circuit independent thought, to shut down critical analysis.
So the label itself becomes the argument.
Exactly. The label is the entire counterargument. There's absolutely no need to present evidence or engage with facts or offer any kind of reasoned rebuttal.
It's just a reflexive dismissal.
The reflexive rejoinder, an automatic response that effectively just shuts down any further discussion. It's like saying, I don't need to listen to you because I've already decided your entire perspective is irrational. End of story.
That sounds, well, it sounds disturbingly similar to gaslighting, doesn't it?
It has strong elements of it, yes.
I mean, when you're telling potentially millions of people that their genuine concerns may be about a leader's authoritarian behavior or documented falsehoods or blatant violations of democratic norms, that these aren't valid observations at all,
Right.
but are instead signs of their own mental instability.
It actively works to create this kind of inverted reality.
Inverted reality.
Yeah, where being disturbed by something like, say, creeping authoritarianism or attacks on established institutions, that's framed as the disorder.
While accepting really transgressive behavior.
No matter how egregious it might seem, is framed as normal, even patriotic. It's a profound psychological manipulation, really.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture of human psychology, you mentioned projection earlier.
Absolutely. The TDS accusation is a classic, almost textbook example of psychological projection.
How so? Explain that a bit more.
Okay, think about it. To maintain internal consistency, to keep believing that your chosen leader is strong, effective, righteous.
Right.
Supporters have to find a way to account for the constant barrage of negative information and criticism directed at him.
And there can be a lot of that. Things like indictments, civil judgments.
Exactly. Multiple civil and criminal indictments, adjudicated instances of fraud or sexual assault, highly controversial public statements, the list goes on.
So instead of integrating that information, which might force them to adjust their view of the leader,
Which would cause significant cognitive dissonance, that inner turmoil we talked about.
it's psychologically easier to do what?
It's far easier to project the derangement outward onto the critics.
So it's not the leader, it's the critics who are the problem.
Precisely. The critics aren't seeing clearly. They're the ones who are sick or unhinged or maybe just unable to accept the leader's supposed genius.
So it externalizes their own internal strain, the mental work needed to defend controversial actions.
Exactly. That externalization, pushing the problem onto others, allows the in-group to preserve its psychological stability and continue believing in the leader's fundamental righteousness. It protects the worldview.
Wow. Okay. That leads us right into the next section, doesn't it? The psychology of that unwavering devotion itself. Why the original TDS accusation works so well.
Right. To really grasp why the TDS accusation is not only necessary, but also so profoundly effective within its target audience, we have to dive much deeper into the psychology of that unwavering loyalty.
And you're saying this isn't just typical political support.
No, it's different. It's not like just voting for a candidate because you align with their policy platform. This aligns far more closely with what academics and observers often describe as a political personality cult.
A personality cult, that's a strong term.
It is, but the framework posits this deep, often unconscious symbiotic relationship between certain kinds of leaders, often authoritarian leaders, and what researchers term authoritarian followers.
Authoritarian followers, what characterizes them, according to the research?
Research consistently identifies specific personality traits. These are individuals often with a high need for cognitive closure, meaning they have a strong desire for firm answers, simple explanations, and a profound aversion to ambiguity or uncertainty. They don't like gray areas.
Okay, what else?
They tend to defer, often unquestioningly, to strong, decisive leaders. They can exhibit aggression toward outgroups or perceived enemies. They often adhere rigidly to conventional norms and generally resist new experiences or information that might challenge their existing worldview.
And this personality profile gets activated when?
It becomes particularly activated by perceptions of widespread threat or chaos or moral decline. It makes them highly receptive to leaders who promise to restore order, provide simple solutions, and deliver that sense of certainty in what feels like very uncertain times.
And when you describe that profile, well, Trump's rhetoric seems almost perfectly engineered to resonate with that frequency, doesn't it?
It really does. He consistently emphasizes themes of security versus instability, this nostalgic, often highly idealized return to a supposedly better past.
Make America great again.
Exactly, and unwavering calls for absolute loyalty and obedience, specifically to him personally.
When he says things like, I am your retribution, or I alone can fix it,
It perfectly tunes into that deep-seated need for a strong, decisive, almost messianic leader figure who will restore what's perceived to have been lost or taken away.
and this personality cult idea, how does the leader's image play into it?
It's crucial. A political personality cult thrives when the leader's image is meticulously crafted, often by the leader themselves and their allies, as heroic, infallible, almost godlike.
Inspiring, unquestioning flattery.
And intense devotion, yes. The leader is presented as uniquely capable, possessing special insight, becoming the ultimate arbiter of truth for the group.
So questioning the leader becomes...
It becomes not just political disagreement, but heresy. A betrayal of the group's collective identity, its core values.
And Trump actively cultivated this, didn't he?
Oh, very actively. With statements like the ones you mentioned. And we've seen numerous instances of his supporters making explicit religious comparisons.
Like what?
Saying things like God put him there to save the nation, or viewing his ongoing legal and political battles as a form of suffering he endures for them, almost like a Christ-like sacrifice. It elevates political loyalty to a whole different, almost spiritual plane.
And is there actual data behind this, beyond anecdotes?
Yes, absolutely. It's not just anecdotal observation. We have empirical evidence that supports this. Research using robust psychological frameworks like the Big Five personality dimensions has identified specific recurring traits in his most loyal supporters. Studies have consistently found that this core group tends to score unusually high on the trait of conscientiousness.
Conscientiousness, meaning orderliness, self-discipline.
Exactly. Particularly the facets related to orderliness, self-discipline, and a desire for conformity. And conversely, they tend to score unusually low on openness to experience.
Low openness, resistance to new ideas, preference for tradition.
Right. High conscientiousness aligns perfectly with that unwavering, disciplined loyalty you see in a cult-like dynamic. And low openness signifies a strong resistance to new ideas, a preference for tradition, a deep craving for certainty.
So people with these traits are just inherently less likely to entertain thoughts or evidence that contradict their belief in the leader?
Essentially, yes. It makes it much harder for contradictory information to even get a foothold, cementing their loyalty even when faced with what seems like overwhelming evidence to the contrary.
What's really fascinating here is how profoundly intertwined this then becomes with an individual's personal identity. It stops being just about what they believe or who they support.
And becomes an inextricable part of who they are.
It's like their identity just merges with the political movement itself.
That's precisely where social identity theory offers some crucial insights.
Explain that.
Well, this theory explains that our self-esteem, our sense of worth, even our very understanding of who we are, is significantly derived from the groups we belong to, our in-groups.
Okay.
And in a highly politically polarized world like ours, partisan affiliation often transcends just simple policy alignment. It becomes a primary, deeply internalized identity.
Which leads to
What psychologists call affective polarization.
Yep.
That's intense in-group favoritism. Our side is good, virtuous, coupled with strong, often visceral out-group animosity, demonizing the other side.
It's more than just disagreeing on taxes. It's this deep emotional dislike.
Exactly. It's feeling-based, not just policy-based.
And for the most committed members of movements like Migari, you're saying it goes even further than that.
Yes. For many, their political identity has effectively fused with their personal identity. Donald Trump isn't just a politician they support. He becomes the living embodiment of their group, their values, their grievances, their hopes.
So because of this identity fusion, any criticism of Trump isn't just politics.
It's not perceived as a detached critique of some distant politician, no. It is felt, often deeply and painfully, as a direct personal attack.
An attack on their own values, their community, their sense of self.
All of the above, their sense of self-worth, even their very existence feels threatened. It becomes existential.
And that explains the almost unbelievable intensity of the defense you sometimes see.
It does. The defense of Trump in this psychological context becomes an act of self-preservation, pure and simple.
The personality cult acts like a social immune system.
That's a great analogy. It vigilantly identifies anything that threatens the leader, a critical news report, a court conviction, an expose, an opponent's speech identifies it as a dangerous pathogen.
And the TDS accusation is the antibody response.
It's the system's primary antibody response, exactly, designed immediately, reflexively, to neutralize the threat by discrediting its source. It's an automatic, often unconscious defense mechanism.
Essential for protecting the collective identity.
And by extension, protecting the self-worth of every individual member who has fused their identity with the leader. It's literally a survival mechanism for their entire worldview.
Wow. Okay, so that's the bedrock of loyalty.
Yeah.
But what happens with Section 3? What happens when that loyalty clashes with reality? The mind's immune system, how beliefs get protected.
Right. So if someone's identity is so deeply wrapped up with their political leader, what happens when they're confronted with information, maybe hard facts, that directly contradict those deeply held beliefs? How does the mind even process that conflict?
Yeah, what goes on in there?
This is precisely where the concept of cognitive dissonance becomes incredibly powerful.
Cognitive dissonance. That discomfort again.
That profound mental discomfort, yeah. That almost gnawing unease you feel when you hold two or more contradictory beliefs, or when new information just directly clashes with a cherished belief.
Give me an example in this context.
Okay, imagine someone who sees themselves as, say, a moral, law-abiding patriot, deeply holds that identity.
Right.
Yet they actively support a leader who has been perhaps convicted of multiple felonies or adjudicated liable for serious misconduct like sexual assault or financial fraud.
That creates a huge internal conflict.
Immense internal conflict, a psychological tension that the mind feels compelled, almost driven, to alleviate.
And research shows this affects how people view the leader.
It does. Research shows that the very act of voting for a candidate and then continuing to support them can cause individuals to view that candidate more favorably over time, simply to justify their initial decision and avoid that uncomfortable feeling of dissonance. It's a subconscious drive for internal consistency. We want our actions and beliefs to line up.
I remember reading Leon Festinger, who developed the theory. He said something like, "A man with a conviction is a hard man to change."
That's the famous quote. Tell him you disagree and he turns away. Show him facts or figures and he questions your sources.
So it seems the supporter isn't necessarily just ignorant of the facts or uninformed.
Not necessarily. Rather, they are psychologically motivated, often completely unconsciously, to reject or reinterpret those facts.
Why? To avoid what?
To avoid a profound and painful discomfort that would threaten their core identity, their whole worldview. Their minds aren't just passively receiving information, they're actively working, like an immune system, to protect their existing beliefs from internal collapse.
So how do they do that? What are these strategies the mind uses?
Well, to alleviate this powerful psychological discomfort, individuals unconsciously employ this fascinating array of strategies. They're powerful mental defenses, really.
Allowing them to maintain a coherent worldview. Keep the story intact.
Exactly. Even when confronted with what might seem to an outsider as overwhelming contradictory evidence.
Okay, what's the most direct strategy?
The most direct is simply denial and distortion, just rejecting conflicting information outright as false, often without even really considering it.
How does that look in practice?
It can manifest as just a blanket refusal to believe accusations, dismissing them wholesale as lies spread by biased media, or demanding an impossible, unattainable standard of proof that no information could ever possibly meet.
And this can even lead to misremembering events.
It can. We've seen examples that look like widespread collective amnesia or outright misremembering of significant public events. Think about the varied interpretations of January 6th.
Right. For many, what objectively happened is just denied or reinterpreted.
Because the actual truth, the visual evidence even, would be too dissonant to accept, too damaging to the narrative.
Okay, denial is one. What else?
Another common tactic is trivialization.
Trivialization.
Yeah.
Making it seem unimportant.
Exactly. This involves minimizing the importance or the severity of the dissonant act. A supporter might even concede that, okay, maybe the action occurred, but then they immediately argue that it's not a big deal. It's inconsequential in the grand scheme of things.
Like saying, I don't care about his personal life.
That's a classic example. Or framing something like January 6th as, just a protest that got a little out of hand. It effectively reduces the weight, the moral implications of the conflicting information.
Makes the dissonance easier to bear. Just sweep it under the rug.
Precisely.
Okay, what about justifying it?
That's the next one. External justification and rationalization. This is where they create often quite an elaborate narrative to excuse the leader's behavior.
Arguing his actions were necessary.
Exactly, arguing that his transgressive or seemingly problematic actions weren't flaws at all, but were absolutely necessary. Maybe he had to be tough or break norms or even, violate laws to combat some perceived greater evil. A deep state, maybe, or a corrupt establishment that was actively working against him, and by extension, against the people.
So his behavior gets reframed as a feature, not a bug.
Perfectly put, the necessary ruthlessness of a wartime leader fighting for us against these powerful, often unseen enemies. It's that he's fighting for me narrative that can justify almost anything.
Okay, denial, trivialization, justification. What about deflection?
Ah, yes. The classic, frequently deployed deflection strategy. Social comparison, often known widely just as whataboutism.
Whataboutism, we hear that a lot.
We do. When a supporter is confronted with an accusation about Trump's actions or character, they might immediately pivot, just redirect the conversation entirely.
To accusations against.
Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, other political figures, anyone else. The logic isn't actually to refute the original charge against Trump.
What is it then?
It's to normalize it by suggesting that everyone does it or maybe that the other side is much worse.
So it lessens the unique moral weight of the accusation.
Exactly. It dilutes it in the sea of perceived comparable wrongdoings. It's a way of saying, you can't criticize him because they are just as bad, if not worse. Takes the pressure off.
Okay, one more you mentioned, attitude bolstering.
Yes, attitude bolstering. This is a fascinating one. Instead of directly addressing the dissonant information or the specific criticism,
They do what?
some supporters resolve the internal conflict by simply strengthening their overall positive attitude toward the leader. Just doubling down on the good stuff.
How does that look?
They might respond to criticism by just vigorously listing all of Trump's perceived accomplishments, or by passionately reasserting their unwavering loyalty, maybe loudly proclaiming their back the blue credentials.
Even when confronted with evidence that contradicts that, like pardons for people who assaulted police.
Exactly. Even then, it's about overwhelming the negative information with this avalanche of positive cognitions and expressions of loyalty, reinforcing the core belief until the dissonance is essentially drowned out.
So all these strategies, denial, trivialization, justification, whataboutism, bolstering, they're all fueled by something called motivated reasoning.
Exactly. Motivated reasoning. That's the unconscious tendency we all have, to some extent, to process information in a way that allows us to reach a particular desired conclusion.
Not necessarily the most accurate or objective one.
Correct. And when it comes to political identity, especially when that identity is deeply fused with a charismatic leader,
The motivation is overwhelmingly.
to arrive at the conclusion that best protects your in-group, your cherished beliefs, and ultimately your own sense of self-worth, accuracy often takes a backseat to identity protection.
And this motivated reasoning gets supercharged today, doesn't it? By confirmation bias and the media landscape.
Oh, absolutely supercharged. Everyone has access now to information sources that only validate their existing beliefs. It's incredibly easy to construct these meticulously curated echo chambers or filter bubbles.
Where you only see stuff that agrees with you.
Pretty much. Only worldview reinforcing information gets seen, shared, celebrated. And this makes it almost effortless to filter out anything that challenges your beliefs. It just reinforces your conviction that you're right, and anyone who disagrees is simply misinformed or maybe even acting in bad faith.
And the pro-Trump media ecosystem plays a big role here.
A huge role. This ecosystem, specific cable news networks, powerful talk radio shows, influential websites, very active social media platforms, it's exceptionally effective at facilitating this motivated reasoning.
How so?
Well, when a controversy arises, this entire apparatus immediately springs into action. It provides ready-made, prepackaged narratives designed explicitly to reduce dissonance for their audience.
What kind of narratives?
They'll systematically attack the credibility of traditional sources, the DOJ, the FBI, mainstream media framing them as inherently biased or even part of a conspiracy.
They offer alternative explanations.
Often, yes. Alternative, sometimes quite fantastical, explanations for events, like the claim that January 6th was somehow an FBI setup, or that court convictions are purely politically motivated witch hunts.
And they frame everything as a battle.
Yes, they frame almost every event as another battle in this grand existential war between Trump and his corrupt enemies. This ecosystem provides supporters with the exact cognitive tools, the narrative frameworks they need.
To process threatening information.
Exactly, to process it in a way that leaves their core beliefs and their identity completely intact, maybe even strengthened by the perceived attack.
So in this kind of ecosystem, traditional arbiters of truth established, news organizations, judicial systems, scientific consensus, they aren't just seen as biased.
No, they're often viewed as fundamentally illegitimate, corrupt, part of a vast conspiracy against the people and their chosen leader.
So the leader and the loyal media outlets, they become the only trustworthy sources.
Effectively, yes, the only truth tellers. It's a profound and frankly dangerous inversion of epistemic authority, where objective, verifiable reality is rejected wholesale in favor of a preferred narrative.
So from that inverted perspective, when a critic presents a fact from, say, the New York Times, or cites a jury verdict, or points to a historical record,
They're not seen as offering objective evidence to be considered, not at all.
from the in-group's viewpoint, they're doing what?
They're simply demonstrating their own brainwashing, their own succumbing to the enemy's propaganda machine.
And the accusation, you have TDS.
Becomes the perfectly logical, psychologically necessary conclusion of this entire inverted framework. It translates to, your reliance on these corrupt, illegitimate sources for your facts is the very definition of your derangement, your inability to see the true reality that we, the enlightened, perceive.
It's an airtight, self-reinforcing system.
Wow, it can be incredibly difficult to penetrate from the outside.
Okay. This brings us to the core, the really provocative idea of this deep dive. Section 4, flipping the switch. The hypothesis of a new derangement syndrome.
Right, we've thoroughly explored the original TDS as a label for critics. But now, the hypothesis, what happens psychologically when that unwavering belief, that deep identity fusion we've been talking about, encounters an undeniable, irreversible setback for the leader, something that just cannot be spun away or ignored.
Like Humpty Dumpty falling off the wall.
Exactly like that. Not just a stumble, not just another controversy that can be weathered, but a public, catastrophic, and irreversible event, something from which his persona, his influence, simply cannot be rebuilt in the same way.
What would that do psychologically?
It would likely create an absolutely massive surge of cognitive dissonance, especially for those individuals whose entire identity is so deeply intertwined with supporting him.
Ones who spent years defending everything.
Exactly. For individuals who have spent years defending every action, every statement, weathering every legal challenge, a definitive, undeniable collapse of his image or his political viability or maybe his perceived moral standing.
That would present a huge conflict.
A profound and excruciating conflict.
Yeah.
A direct clash between their deeply held belief in him as this infallible, successful, righteous leader and undeniable, incontrovertible evidence of his failure or maybe profound compromise or even potentially explicit betrayal.
The psychological pain would be immense.
Almost unbearable. Admitting they were wrong or that their loyalty was profoundly misplaced, that would trigger an identity crisis on a truly grand scale.
So, based on this hypothesis, this state of new derangement, quote-unquote, it wouldn't be characterized by irrational hatred of the leader from his opponents, like the original TDS suggested.
No, the hypothesis suggests something different.
It would be about the deep psychological fallout from a shattered belief in him, a catastrophic collapse of their entire worldview.
That's the core idea, yes. The psychological debris left behind when the central pillar of their reality crumbles.
So paint a picture for us. What could this new derangement, this fallout, actually look like? What are its potential manifestations?
Well, one of the most immediate and visceral manifestations could be a deep-seated sense of betrayal, an intense, often misdirected anger.
Why betrayal and anger specifically?
Because the emotional investment from his most ardent supporters is just incredibly high. It's often built on this foundation of perceived grievance, a promise of retribution against enemies, a yearning for this strong, decisive figure.
Right.
So If that figure were to unequivocally fall or maybe be exposed in a way that is utterly irreconcilable with their image of him.
Like what kind of exposure?
Well, imagine, hypothetically, a scenario where he's profoundly implicated in something so morally compromising that it just shatters their perception of his integrity. Perhaps something emerges that exposes a deep personal hypocrisy that they just can't rationalize away. Maybe even, theoretically, something connecting him to deeply unsavory elements that contradict his public persona.
Yeah.
Or, another angle, perhaps his perceived collaboration with figures seen as adversaries, maybe taking advice from someone like a Russian dictator. If that were suddenly and definitively viewed not as strength or strategy, but as an unforgivable betrayal of core national principles.
The reaction could be huge.
The anger could be cataclysmic, because it wouldn't just be about politics at that point. It would be about a profound personal and identity-level trauma. And that anger, it could turn inward, leading to depression or despair, or it could lash out outward in unpredictable, maybe even volatile ways.
And after something like that,
Yeah,
what would be left for them to trust?
that's another potential manifestation. We could see a further, perhaps even more extreme erosion of trust, not just in other politicians, but in any political figure or institution, period.
Why?
Well, the thinking might go, if their ultimate leader, the one who promised to fix everything, the one who is supposed to deliver retribution against corruption, if he falls in such a definitive, undeniable way.
And what hope is there?
Exactly. It could lead to this profound conclusion that the entire system, all of it, every single part, is irredeemably corrupt, broken beyond repair, that no one, absolutely no one, can ever be trusted again.
Plunging them into political nihilism.
Potentially, yes. A sense of utter hopelessness about the democratic process itself, a complete withdrawal.
What about conspiracy theories? We know they're already prevalent.
A very likely and frankly highly concerning outcome is a doubling down on conspiracy theories to an even greater, more extreme extent than what we've already witnessed.
Why would that happen?
Because when a core belief system, one that's been the very foundation of your identity and your understanding of the world, is fundamentally shaken or shattered, the mind desperately, desperately searches for an explanation. Any explanation that preserves some sense of control and meaning.
So if the leader fails, it can't be his fault.
From this perspective, no. It must be because an even more powerful shadowy cabal, maybe the deep state, an international conspiracy, whatever, actively and secretly undermined him, sabotaged him.
This ties back to what you said earlier about Pizzagate, QAnon, the stolen election narrative.
Exactly. As coping mechanisms, these narratives satisfy deep psychological motives. Epistemic motives providing simple answers for complex, unsettling events.
Existential motives.
Creating a comforting sense of safety and control in a world that feels increasingly threatening and chaotic.
And social motives.
Reinforcing group belonging and identity. Granting adherents access to this special superior truth that outsiders, the sheep, don't possess.
So if the leader definitively falls, these mechanisms become even more vital.
Even more vital, leading to potentially increasingly elaborate, bizarre, and extreme conspiracy theories just to make sense of a world that no longer aligns with their cool beliefs. The more inexplicable the collapse seems, the wilder the conspiracy required to explain it away might become.
What about other reactions? Besides conspiracy theories or nihilism?
Well, conversely, or perhaps simultaneously for some, it could lead to that profound political apathy we mentioned. A deep, pervasive disengagement. A feeling that if even he couldn't fix it, then literally nothing can, so why bother? Just check out entirely.
Or the opposite, lashing out.
Or on the more active and potentially aggressive side, yes, a violent lashing out at the perceived enemies who supposedly caused the fall. Whether those are political opponents, the media, the judicial system, maybe even former allies who are now seen as traitors.
Trying to maintain the narrative of persecution.
Yeah.
Martyrdom.
Exactly. Perhaps even escalating it into outright aggression, potentially dangerous forms of vigilantism or political violence. This is precisely that Humpty Dumpty scenario we alluded to. The pieces of a once coherent worldview cannot be put back together, leading to profound psychological and potentially societal fragmentation.
So ultimately, this whole concept suggests that the true derangement in our political landscape, it isn't necessarily measured by how loudly someone criticizes a political figure.
No, the hypothesis suggests it's measured differently. It's measured perhaps by the distance of one's beliefs from verifiable reality.
And by the psychological contortions required.
Yes, by the sheer magnitude of the psychological contortions required to maintain that profound, almost cult-like devotion to an individual.
It's about prioritizing loyalty over reality.
Prioritizing unwavering loyalty to a figure over a shared understanding of objective facts, even if those facts concern, hypothetically, betrayal, profound failures, or deeply problematic actions that contradict the leader's image.
This derangement of devotion, as you called it.
Yes. It suggests that for some, the greatest threat to their psychological well-being isn't criticism from the outside, but the potential collapse of the very figure they have built their identity around. That would trigger an internal crisis of truly epic proportions.
Which leads us to the final, crucial section. If this is the complex psychological landscape, how do we navigate it? Section 5, a framework for integrity and engagement.
Right. If direct facts often fail, if they can even backfire, what does this truly mean for how we communicate across these deep divides? It seems clear that just yelling facts louder or engaging in tit-for-tat arguments often just doesn't work.
And can even deepen the divide, right?
They absolutely do not work often. And yes, they can exacerbate the problem. Arguing, for example, no, I'm not deranged, you're the one who's deranged.
What does that do?
It only validates the fundamental premise that the conversation is about mental states, about who is crazy, rather than about substantive issues or policies or facts. It keeps the discussion trapped precisely within that unproductive, emotionally charged framework the accuser created, a framework designed specifically to dismiss and delegitimize.
And even more importantly, you mentioned the backfire effect. Presenting contrary evidence can actually make things worse.
It absolutely can. This is a well-documented component of motivated reasoning. When individuals are confronted with information that directly challenges their core beliefs, their identity-linked beliefs, they often don't change their mind.
They double down.
They double down. They entrench themselves deeper in their original belief. They perceive the new information not as objective evidence to consider, but as a personal attack.
An attack on their identity, their intelligence, their moral standing.
Exactly. It feels like a threat, not an opportunity to learn or adjust.
So a fact war just raises the threat level.
Precisely. It activates their psychological defenses, strengthens their commitment to their in-group, and turns the conversation into a battle for identity survival, not a collaborative search for truth or understanding.
And when someone feels their identity is under attack,
logic and reason often take a backseat to pure self-preservation. You often can't reason someone out of a position they weren't reasoned into in the first place, especially when that position is so tightly bound to their very sense of self.
Okay, so if direct confrontation often just reinforces the divide, triggers these defenses, what can work? Are there more effective, maybe evidence-based ways to approach this? Methods that might lower defenses, create space for reflection?
Absolutely there are. And thankfully, we have some powerful, scientifically validated models to look at. One incredibly potent example is deep canvassing.
Deep canvassing, where did that come from?
It was initially developed by LGBTQ+ activists, actually, to effectively reduce prejudice and change hearts and minds on really divisive social issues like marriage equality.
And how does it work? What's the focus?
It fundamentally focuses on a genuine two-way exchange, grounded deeply in shared human experience rather than just delivering scripted talking points or bombarding people with facts.
What are its core principles?
Well, first, non-judgmental curiosity. You genuinely invite the other person to share their perspective without them fearing judgment from you.
Okay.
Second, active listening. Truly seeking to understand their perspective, their underlying values, the life experiences that shaped their beliefs. Listening to understand, not just to reply.
Makes sense.
Third, vulnerable story sharing. This is key. You briefly share a relevant personal story of your own. This helps build rapport and empathy. It humanizes you and the issue.
And finally,
exploring personal stake, gently guiding them to reflect on how the issue might affect them personally or people they care deeply about. This moves the conversation from the abstract and political to the concrete and personal.
that sounds powerful. What about other approaches?
Another incredibly insightful and powerful approach is called street epistemology.
Street epistemology. What's that?
It's a non-confrontational kind of Socratic method. It helps people examine how they arrive at their beliefs, not just what they believe.
Focusing on the process, not just the conclusion.
Exactly. It's less about changing minds directly in that moment and more about inviting critical self-reflection on one's own reasoning process. How reliable is the way I came to believe this?
How does it work in practice?
You start by establishing genuine rapport, making it clear the goal isn't winning an argument, but mutual understanding. Then you clarify their specific belief and ask them to rate their confidence in it. maybe on a scale, 0 to 100.
Why rate the confidence?
It subtly transforms a binary right-wrong belief into something more nuanced, a position on a spectrum. It opens up space.
Okay, then what?
The core is exploring the how, gently asking, how did you come to be so confident in that belief? Focusing on the reliability of the method they used. Was it faith, intuition, a specific news source, personal experience?
And then you challenge the method.
Not directly challenge, but explore its reliability using hypotheticals. You might ask, carefully, if someone else used that exact same method, say, trusting their gut to reach the complete opposite conclusion, would that method still be reliable?
Encouraging a detached evaluation of the reasoning itself.
Precisely. Without directly attacking their conclusion, it opens a subtle door for reevaluation, maybe planting a seed of doubt about the method's infallibility.
So if we synthesize these methodologies, deep canvassing, street epistemology, what's a practical framework for constructive engagement in these tough conversations?
Okay, let's build that framework. First, and maybe most fundamentally, you have to consciously reframe your own goal.
Shift away from...
Shift your mindset away from winning the argument or proving them wrong or converting them
So what?
to a place of genuine understanding their perspective and maybe creating space for reflection. Success isn't immediate conversion. It's fostering a respectful exchange where defenses might lower, even just a tiny bit, allowing a seed of doubt or a new consideration to possibly be planted. It's a long game.
Okay, reframe the goal. What's next?
Crucially, you must learn to disengage from the frame.
Meaning don't take the bait.
Exactly. Don't take the bait when someone throws out, "Do you have TDS?" or some similar accusatory label. Arguing about whether you're deranged just legitimizes the insult. It instantly derails the conversation into that unproductive, emotionally charged territory we want to avoid.
So what do you do instead?
Calmly sidestep the label and redirect the focus to a more productive, substantive area.
So instead of reacting defensively, I'm not deranged, you're the one in a cult, which just escalates things.
Right, plays right into their framing.
You can try a response like,
Maybe something like, I can see you feel very strongly that critics of the president are unfair. You know, I'm less interested in labels, though. I genuinely like to understand what you see as his most important accomplishments. Or maybe what concerns you most about the country right now.
a respectful redirection.
Yeah.
Bypasses the attack, opens a different door.
Exactly. Then consistently lead with curiosity, not correction.
Curiosity, not correction.
Adopt a mindset of genuine, non-judgmental curiosity. Use open-ended questions that truly invite them to explain their reasoning, their experiences, their underlying values. This approach is inherently disarming. It feels collaborative, not adversarial.
What kind of questions?
Things like, help me understand, what is it about him that connects with you so strongly? What resonates with your own values? Or, wow, there's so much information out there these days, it's incredibly hard to know what to trust, isn't it? When you hear different reports about an event, what's your personal process for figuring out which one you believe is the most reliable?
That's a good one. Focuses on their process.
Or even, what are you most concerned about for the future of the country, and how do you specifically see him addressing that particular concern? These questions invite personal reflection, not just a recitation of talking points.
And it's important to listen for the underlying stuff too, right? Values, emotions.
So incredibly important. Listen deeply for, and then validate their underlying values or emotions. Beneath the political talking points, there are almost always genuine human emotions: fear, maybe a profound sense of grievance, a longing for security, a desire for respect.
Acknowledge those deeper themes. Validate the emotion.
Yes. Validate the emotion itself without necessarily endorsing any misinformation or specific belief attached to it. This builds crucial trust. It shows you're hearing them as a person, not just a political opponent to be defeated.
So instead of jumping in with, that's a conspiracy theory, that's absurd, try a response like, it sounds like you're deeply worried that the system might be rigged against everyday people, and that maybe powerful forces aren't being held accountable. That must feel really frustrating and unsettling. I can understand why you'd feel that way. You validate the feeling of frustration, not the specific theory.
Okay. And finally, when it's your turn to speak, share your perspective how. When sharing a potentially contrasting perspective, try sharing your viewpoint through a personal story, not abstract facts or statistics. Resist that urge to drop a fact-check bomb, which, as we've discussed, often just triggers defensiveness.
Instead, share a brief, maybe vulnerable story about a personal experience.
Exactly. Something that shaped your own perspective on the issue. This leverages that core principle of deep canvassing. A personal story is an expression of your lived experience. It can't be debunked in the same way as statistic can.
It connects on a human level, builds empathy.
Builds a bridge of empathy rather than a wall of argument.
So rather than saying flat out, he was found liable for sexual assault in a court of law, that's a fact, which is a direct factual confrontation.
And might be immediately rejected or rationalized away.
You could try a more personal approach like,
Maybe something like, the reason I get particularly concerned when I hear leaders talk about women in a certain way, or when they face certain kinds of accusations, it's because of an experience my own sister had in her workplace. And it makes me worry deeply about the kind of culture we might be inadvertently creating for our children for future generations.
shifting the conversation to a relatable human level, inviting understanding, not immediate rebuttal.
That's the goal. It doesn't guarantee agreement, but it significantly increases the chances of a constructive, respectful exchange.
Okay. This has been incredibly insightful. Let's try to wrap this up.
Sure.
So we've taken this really extensive deep dive into Trump derangement syndrome. We've explored its function as a sophisticated rhetorical weapon,
Right.
uncovered the deep psychological underpinnings of that unwavering loyalty that enables it.
The identity fusion, the cognitive defenses.
Exactly. And then we delved into this fascinating, maybe unsettling hypothesis of what a new derangement syndrome might look like if those foundational beliefs were ever irrevocably shattered.
And if we connect all this to the bigger picture, what we see is that the very accusation of TDS often reveals much more about the psychological needs and the defensive mechanisms of the person making the accusation.
Than it does about the actual mental state of the person being accused.
Precisely. It stands as a profound symptom of our extreme political polarization, a landscape where identity becomes so deeply fused with a charismatic leader that it creates this almost impenetrable cognitive fortress against any contradictory information.
Which means to effectively engage across these divides, we have to go deeper.
We have to move beyond just surface-level arguments about facts and policies and truly try to understand the fundamental psychological needs, the need for certainty, for belonging, for identity that drive these intense loyalties, and understand the complex defense mechanisms used to protect them.
So the real syndrome, perhaps, it's not simple opposition or disagreement.
Perhaps not. Perhaps it's a profound and, frankly, perilous derangement of devotion.
Derangement of devotion. Explain that one last time.
A state where unwavering loyalty fundamentally trumps verifiable reality, where the leader's word becomes its own self-contained validation, regardless of any outside evidence or logical consistency.
And this demands constant adjustment from the follower.
It often demands that its adherents constantly shift and redefine their own principles, their own understanding of right and wrong, just to remain in perfect alignment with the leader. This leads to that significant ongoing cognitive dissonance that must be managed through those powerful psychological defenses we discussed.
Which leads to a final, maybe provocative thought for everyone listening. What does it truly take for any of us, in any of our deeply held beliefs, political or otherwise, to genuinely evaluate evidence that challenges our own worldview?
That's the question, isn't it?
What cognitive defenses might you have in place right now, perhaps unknowingly, protecting your own cherished beliefs from discomforting truths? Something to think about.
Definitely food for thought for all of us.
We sincerely hope this deep dive has given you a fresh perspective, maybe some practical tools for navigating our complex, often confusing information landscape. Thank you so much for joining us on this vital exploration.
Thanks for diving deep with us.
Until next time, keep digging, keep questioning, and above all, keep learning.